Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's show. As usual, I'll talk about some of the special guests coming up in the future weeks before introducing this evening's guest. But before I even do that, I'll just, for one last time, I'll mention, if you're interested in being a candidate for the Scottish Family Party in next year's Scottish elections, it's just about not too late for you to get in touch and to join in with the process that's going on. We've got a lot of people involved with that now wanting to be candidates, which is great. But if you'd like to join in that process and explore the possibility of being a candidate for us next year, just drop us an email at admin@scottishfamily.org, admin@scottishfamily.org. Right, a little bit about who's coming up. Next week, we've got yet another doctor. We've got Dr. Paul Gilfillan, who's a sociologist at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh. I've heard him speak before. He spoke at our conference a couple of years ago. It was excellent. So we look forward to that next week. The week after that, there's going to be a discussion about what gets called sort of LGBT conversion therapy. We wouldn't call it that. I'm not going to be taking part in that discussion, I don't think, but another couple of people are going to be on talking about that and the moves towards making that type of help for people illegal. Then the week after that, we'll have some sort of Christmas special. I'm not quite sure what shape that's going to take. Yeah, but it might be something, a little bit of fun. Watch this space. Right, on to this evening's special guest. We have with us this week Dr. Anthony Samarov. Now, Anthony is a member of the Scottish Libertarian Party, a representative of the Scottish Libertarian Party. I met him at a small party question time event last year. We've also met once or twice to have a chat as well. He's the author of a book I would recommend to you about the universal basic income. It says for and against. I mean, to be honest, it's mainly against. But it's a very interesting book. And Anthony's currently in Florida. So by the wonders of modern technology, Anthony is going to join us now. Anthony is going to join us now. I can hear you. We can't see you at the moment.
I don't know what's happened with that. Let's see if we can do an on-off thing.
I could see Anthony 5 minutes ago.
I could see myself. Right, let me see if I change webcam. Right. I'm just using the computer's webcam. Sorry for that false start, ladies and gentlemen. Don't know what happened to the webcam. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Richard. It's a great pleasure to join you. I escaped the Scottish lockdown madness for sunny Florida at the moment, where they're relatively open. I would love to say I voted with my feet to support the government. The governor here's brave stance, but actually just so happens that this is where the lady lives, so I'm staying with her.
Yeah, very good. I have to say, this camera you changed to is much better than the one you had before.
Okay.
Much better picture. Right, that's great. Now, there's all sorts of topics we can talk about. When we've chatted before, we've covered all sorts of ground. Some areas where we agree, some areas where we disagree. But we thought we'd start with the hot topic that Anthony's already mentioned. We haven't really talked about the whole coronavirus lockdown business on this show. And when you've got a libertarian on, you can guarantee you're going to have some strong views on the matter. So let's start there. So, Anthony, you're going to give us a sort of overview of your take of the whole thing.
Well, let's see. I think I'm not so worried about the fact that the government lockdown. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you expect the government, you would expect the government to do. They are in the position where they're supposedly responsible for everyone. And they're going to be risk averse because anything that happens is ultimately going to get blamed on them if the virus spread unnecessarily. But what does worry me is the fact that no one seems to notice that anyone who's, no one, right from the start, no one who had an alternative view, that, for example, something I think would be quite reasonable would be to put resources towards shielding the elderly and vulnerable. And, maybe let younger people more or less live their lives. Even, it's not a strict libertarian position, but if the government wants to say, look, mandate that if people wanted to take off their jobs while this is a hot thing, while they're at risk, if people wanted to stay at home, that the government could guarantee the right to do that, or if they were vulnerable or something, without taking this kind of extreme position. The thing is, no one was allowed on TV that has an alternative position. It's like we live in some communist, fascist country where only one opinion is allowed. There certainly are experts both economists, epidemiologists, medical people who think that this is the wrong strategy. I think definitely people would see it would be more skeptical towards the lockdown strategy if the government hasn't removed all the negative economic consequences of this from sight by pushing them backwards into the future, by printing tons of money, putting people on furlough, or we'll pay for you to eat out in a restaurant, we'll give you half off if you go to eat out. This madness. I mean, where's all this money going to come from? The standard libertarian question.
Yeah.
Where's all the money going to come
Yeah.
from? I really, really fear that in the future, people in this country aren't used to poverty. In certain countries, they're used to being poor, but people here aren't psychologically prepared for what the economic consequences of this lockdown is. There's been no cost-benefit analysis. Not only that, no one's talking about the cost-benefit analysis. None of the politicians do. I have a article here from UNICEF. People can look it up. COVID-19 devastates already fragile health systems. Over 6,000 additional children under 5 could die a day. The UN warns, another article, economic downturn could kill hundreds of thousands of children in 2020. Here's from the Express in the UK. Cancer deaths set to soar amid coronavirus crisis, and that's because people can't get into hospital to be checked out for perfectly routine checkups, and they're going to die because of it. But if you dare to mention this, you're just someone that wants to kill grandma, apparently. The idea of even making a cost-benefit analysis is anathema. So
Yeah.
I'm scared. Yeah. I'm scared by the fact that people aren't even saying, well, can we not have a public debate about this? Nicola Sturgeon's passing the lockdown procedures in Scotland without a vote in Parliament. She's effectively the dictator of Scotland when it comes to these things. So I'm really, really worried more about the public response than the government's response, and the fact that people aren't questioning this.
Yeah. There's just a question here we can clear up very quickly. No.
All right. Are we related?
No. That's quite interesting.
Because we're both bald.
I was thinking, from a libertarian point of view, I mean, let's say that coronavirus was actually 3 times more serious than it is, or 6 times more serious than it is for each age group. But what sort of measures would you hypothetically endorse as a libertarian in the face of a much more serious illness?
Yeah, see, that's
or is it just a matter of principle that you wouldn't?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you're going to hear a wide spectrum of responses, even from libertarians, on that. It's hard to say. I mean, I wasn't strongly against the 3 weeks lockdown to flatten the curve. In the past, in hindsight, it seems like it was just the thin end of the wedge. So if coronavirus was really as deadly as the people who think it's as the worst is, would it be necessary to mandate these kinds of measures? Would people not be sheltering in place as they were? Even for younger people, I don't know what the solution is. What the fact is, what I do know is they're not consulting the science. Might it not be better if young people just get it and get it out the way? If they can just I mean, for me, while I'm in Florida, this would be the best time to get it. I'll just hang out in the house for 2 or 3 weeks. Then when I get home, I don't need to go around. I won't need to worry about giving it to my parents. So the thing is, people live and people die every day, and people need to have to be able to be given the maximum scope to make their own choices. So at least I would like it to be a little bit more science-based than it is, even if it was killing a lot of people. Yeah,
I think in terms of choice, I mean, I think if the Scottish Premier League, if their games were open next week, I think the stadiums would be full.
Yes,
I think when people make individual risk assessments, there would be a tiny fraction of the amount of limitation of activity that we're seeing. But in terms of the of the illness. Like you said, at the first lockdown, I think at that point there was quite a bit of uncertainty about the nature of the disease as well. I think now there are still concerns about how its long-term effects on people. It's not just a matter of counting the death rate. Some people are experiencing long-term effects, in brain damage or whatever, all sorts of other things. So it's a very complex thing to assess. But you're right, the disconnect between people's personal decision-making and the balancing of the different factors by the government is very, very different. Now, you mentioned the economic results of it, and that people generally don't seem at all concerned. It's as though they just can't conceive of living in a society that's not as wealthy. And I think that's underlined by, but it even seems like the UK and the Scottish government are in the same mindset. They're still just giving money away hand over fist to win people over, assuming that democratically that's a winner. They're assuming there's not going to be many people who are saying, hang on, what you're doing? You're miles in debt. We're in an economic crisis, and you're just giving away money in all directions just to keep yourselves popular. But they don't worry about that because they think so few people actually understand the possible consequences that they just go ahead.
And do they even understand the consequences? I mean, they're not stupid. I'm amazed that third world countries have locked down. I mean, Malawi protested the lockdown, and their government withdrew because they were like, they live hand to mouth. And the politicians in countries like India are not stupid. They know that some people are going to starve to death if they don't allow tourism and things like that. So the only conclusion is they either don't care, or they think there's too many people, and they don't think it would be too bad a thing if some people died off. But I mean, coming back to I thought of another point to address your question regarding the lockdowns. Whether if the virus was more severe, would lockdowns be justified? This presumes that lockdowns are actually effective at stopping the spread of disease. We don't actually see evidence of that. If you look across countries, if you look at the charts that we've seen from all the nations across the world, even different states in America that have had different policies, it seems completely and utterly random. If you didn't know the name of the country attached to the chart, you wouldn't be able to tell when they locked down, what the effect of the lockdown is, if they ever mandated masks, when they mandated masks, what percentage of their population was wearing masks. The charts are just totally random. We were told that, say, Sweden might suffer 80,000, 90,000 deaths because they didn't lock down severely, and they had about 6,000. Did the people who are pro-lockdown say, oh, well, maybe we got it wrong, maybe lockdowns aren't that effective? No, they made up an excuse. They said, well, Swedish people don't really live close together like they do in other countries. They just pull this stuff out their backsides. Same with Japan. They said, they almost wanted Japan to have like tremendous numbers of deaths because it would, that's what they get for not having a more strict lockdown. When it didn't come to pass, they said, oh, well, Asian people keep to themselves and they all wear masks. They're just making it up. It's like, it's this unfalsifiable claim that lockdowns stop the spread of disease. Mm-hmm. And there's just really
going back to Africa. I think it's interesting with Africa. And I hear there, other countries introduce lockdowns, but the people who are most vulnerable to coronavirus are often people who are in later life in Western countries who, to be honest, wouldn't have reached that stage in life if it hadn't been for the quality of medical care available. Whereas some African countries, they haven't got many people who are in that bracket, so they've got less people who are going to be at risk of very serious health problems with coronavirus. So it's thought that some African countries just locked down unnecessarily on the basis of international advice. I mean, just going back to the graphs issue, I mean, I think if you just look within the UK, I think if you look at the graphs there is evidence that the lockdowns have had an effect on the virus. I mean, there's something called the prevention paradox, where if you warn something terrible is going to happen, do something to prevent it. If it does prevent it, there'll always be people who will say, oh, well, that wasn't really necessary because, look, it didn't happen. But then the reason it happened. But you're right, comparing different countries, there are so many variables that it's quite hard to understand what's going on. What I would just say one more thing, sir. What I would say, though, there is I would say if someone believes, I mean, if you've got, say, that the full hand of the coronavirus skeptic packet in your hand, then you're going to have, you don't believe that the disease is very serious. Lockdowns don't work. Social distancing doesn't work. Masks don't work. Vaccination doesn't work. Now, I would say if someone's got all 5 of those views, I would question that. I would say, because surely rationally you could hold 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5 or
Yes.
4 out of 5. But if someone's got like 5 out of 5, I might think, is this really looking at the evidence, or is this just some underlying attitude of skepticism to the whole thing?
Yeah, I see what you mean. And people really do get tribal with their thinking when it comes down to these. I think people's peer group seems to determine their views on coronavirus more than anything else. I mean, the hatred that I got on Facebook just for posting that there would be, deaths from lockdowns was pretty shocking. The thing is, I really don't know how we navigate a world in which it seems that people come to conclusions on these things on a tribal basis rather than based on reason and evidence. Now, I can tell why people would be skeptical because they're sold a false basket of goods. But what we have is this mentality where I don't know, like you go out and you speak to people and they're not even in touch with their audience. Like they're not aware that the views that they have and the way that they communicate them, say the card carrying 5 out of 5 coronavirus skeptic, they're not even speaking to the individual in front of them. Like they've constructed an idea of reality in their head. And I think when people are bad communicators in that way, and it makes whatever they believe sound stupid. And a lot of the times, if you have good ideas and you're a bad communicator of those ideas, you're probably better not communicating them than speaking up.
Yeah. I mean, the media trick, of course, is to focus on incompetent communicators of the unpopular
That's
ideas.
a good point.
So the BBC and others, they're specialists at putting the microphone under the nose of just someone who happens to hold an opinion. But if you do that, you've got such power. If you've got 100 people from any political party or from any religious faith or from any philosophical outlook, you'll find 1 or 2 who really won't do a great job with the mic under their nose. And if you've got editorial control, that's what you can put up. And then on the other, straight after that, you can put up some specialist somewhere who's quite articulate and much more considered. And you can basically completely control the message as editor. I think that's what's happening. I mean, mainly the other point of view isn't given airtime.
That's right.
But I think what's developed in the nation, I think for example, the BBC think, they think it's morally virtuous to be frightening people about coronavirus, because if they frighten people, they're going to follow the rules, and that ultimately will be best for the country. Now, there is some, there's some rationality in that. I mean, there is some logic there. But on the other hand, whether there's logic there or not, the BBC or other media outlets shouldn't be setting out to effectively to be presenting a one-sided story or a distorted picture, which I think is the situation we've tended to get into.
Especially when they are funded by the taxpayer, and it's not like there's a free market in presenting information. Not anyone can get on the television. Not only that, people are being banned from Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube for posting alternative information. Experts are being banned. A friend of mine who's a very popular libertarian podcaster, Tom Woods, you should check out his presentations on COVID on YouTube. Tom Woods, COVID. He's got 3 or 4 really good presentations he's made. Facebook fact checked one of his videos, and they didn't just fact check it, like give a standard response dismissing it. They actually went through multiple of the claims in the videos and attempted to debunk it. But it was so pathetic as to, in one case, they said their fact check was, well, many experts disagree with this position. And it's like, okay, well, these experts disagree with your position. Are you going to put the same fact check on the contrary claim? No, it always slices one way. It always and what really shocks me is, I don't know about you, Richard, but when I was growing up, my experience of the left, I was for my sins on the left up until the age of about 21, 22 maybe. They thought themselves radical, anti-establishment, FUCK the government, and whatnot. And now it just seems that there's not a single establishment position that they don't love. They love the European Union, the most establishment organization I can think of. And, they're not only are they in favor of these lockdown controls, which are certainly going to hurt the working class, which they claim to love so much, more than affluent people, but they're calling to be controlled more. They want more control.
Yeah.
It's shocking to me.
The Scottish Family Party has taken a position with regard to lockdown. We've taken as a mild lockdown skeptic position in general, but we've published today that we're saying to the government, Scottish government, what they should be doing now. They've got the vaccines. They can see how long it's going to take to roll it out, to give it to everyone who wants it. And then they know how long it's going to take to become active. So they should now be setting a definite date and saying after whatever, 1st of May or whatever, that's it. Everything's back to normal. If you want to take measures personally, that's fine. But as far as rules and regulations are concerned, that's it. We're completely back to normal from them. Which you would think would be the obvious thing to be doing, to be putting light at the end of the tunnel for people. But I'm suspecting, as a lot of other people, that they'll be trying to string it out. Now, I think this gets to the point where you start saying, why are people doing that? I don't really buy the line that, it's the thin end of the wedge. Certainly not, it's all plans to subdue us to the government or whatever. But I think for Nicola Sturgeon, she obviously realizes that it's played really well in terms of her popularity. So the temptation to just have something else, some measures or other, continuing in the longer term, I think will be quite strong. But we're saying we're completely against that. Set a date, and then that's it. The whole thing's over, and we're back to normal. Plan your summer now, etc.
Yes, and that's been one of the most difficult things about this lockdown, is that people can't plan for the future. There's a term in economics called regime uncertainty, which is the idea that if the government, people on the left like to talk about how unstable markets are and how the government can be a moderating force in markets, but see if the regime can change the regulations at any point, it makes economic planning completely impossible. Well, you don't know if this regulation is going to change or that. You can't plan 2 or 3 years ahead. So this has made just planning living impossible. Like, I don't know where I'm going to be next month, because I don't know if the countries that I want to go to are going to be open or closed. Can they not just throw people a bone and give them a little bit of an idea? People, have lost their businesses and things. There's not really much compassion for them. I just don't understand how people can't see the other side of this. I'm really shocked and appalled by what I've been seeing in Facebook from pro-lockdown people. I mean, can they not just say something as simple as, I know this is really horrible for people and it's not what anyone would have wanted, etc., etc. But what you get is more along the lines of, you just want to go out for a haircut. It's very infuriating.
Yeah, like you say, people's ability to experience fear of the future economically,
right,
I think is at a pretty low ebb. And people find it difficult to imagine that there's going to be real economic hardship ahead, that the NHS or education are not going to be able to be funded in the way that they are now. Or if the government keeps borrowing like crazily, eventually the wheels are going to come off and something's going to go wrong in that regard. I think people don't really take that seriously. Maybe people's we're at the point where people a lot of people don't remember that sort of thing in the past, so they find it hard to envisage it in the future. But if the economy falls to bits, we can just give everyone a universal basic income, can't we? And then that will
All
That
right.
will solve
Okay.
the problem.
Well, this is one of my fears about the universal basic income. I mean, people think that this is some liber this is going to liberate man to pursue his higher desires, and we'll all find out what we really want to do with our lives, and
Yeah.
we'll be able to do that.
So could you just explain what a universal basic income is? Sorry, in case
Okay,
anyone
it's the
isn't
idea
quite
that
sure.
that everyone should be entitled to a sum of money, not a great deal of money, but enough to make sure that they don't go starving and are able to meet their basic needs. And they should be entitled to this as a dividend paid out from by the government. Um, and this the best arguments for in favor of it is that it would reduce the bureaucratic complexity of the system and be cheaper to administrate, because it's just a flat sum paid to everyone regardless of what they earn. And the second good argument for it is that um, no matter how much people were earning, they would still earn more by working. So it wouldn't create like the poverty trap where that we find with some welfare benefits, where if people work a little bit more, their take-home money is less because they lose their benefits. Those are the two favorable arguments for it. Well, there's more arguments in favor of it, but those are the two I find most convincing. The problem is, I think this is going to be, if you look at what's happening in China with the social credit system, where the government gives people a rating on what good or bad citizen they are, the government could easily do this with the universal basic income. It's like, first of all, oh, well, you didn't sort out your recycling, so you're getting a
Mhm.
fine on your universal basic income, or someone flicks a cigarette butt uh, in the park, and oh, we're going to dock your universal basic income, and it's like, yeah, why not get them?
Mhm.
Why shouldn't we? I mean, why should we as a society furnish them with a universal basic income? But then look what's happening on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube with people with unpopular views being banned. How long before I might not be appearing on this show if I thought that £1,000 a month or whatever hinged on me not being a political dissident. So a lot of scary things could happen with this universal basic income. It would make a great plot for a dystopian
Yeah.
science
But
fiction novel.
that's really interesting. This idea that it would just be another thing for people just to worry about. It would be another
Right,
deterrence to speak in your mind. And
right,
already in Scotland, I often say virtually everyone's got a reason to keep their head down.
right,
It's their job, it's their course, it's their partner's job, it's there's some connection where they're thinking, I'm not quite sure what would happen if I spoke out, and they might be a bit reluctant. But I hadn't really thought about that with the universal basic income, but that would be a very significant factor as soon as they started saying this is something that can be taken away.
for sure. And it might start universal, but how long can it stay universal? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, so far as I've seen, the government uses any means at its disposal to, um, well, I mean, the government kind of depends on people being dependent. Uh, we're told by that, oh, the reason why we have poor is, greedy capitalists need poor people to exploit. But I think it's really the government that depends on having poor people, because if people on low incomes achieve the middle class income, they do what middle class people do. Take people out the public schools and put them in better private schools. Okay, well, there won't be so many people going, who'll educate the poor without the government? They'll get health insurance, so less people will be on NHS waiting list. Oh, less. Who's going to treat the sick? Who's going to treat poor people without the government? People aren't going to go into the military as readily, so they're not going to have so much basic. It's not going to be easy to get people to fight these foreign interventions. Crime would go down significantly if socio-economic conditions improved as well. So the government depends on crises. That's why it's come into full bloom during this coronavirus crisis. And every crisis is the health of the state. Sadly, I fear that the the state's stated purpose of, being a referee is at odds with the incentive structure of having a state.
So if you take the SNP as an illustration, do you believe that the SNP really underneath it want people to be dependent on the government? That's their ideal. Do you think that thought is in their consciousness, or do you think it floats underneath?
No, I wouldn't say, well, I mean, there might be some people like that. I think it's more that every system tends to produce the incentives that it tends to produce what's economically incentivized to produce. So if you look at the welfare state, the purpose is the stated purpose is to alleviate poverty, but instead it creates intergenerational poverty. It replaces the local community, which would be the natural source of people's security, because when you're getting a welfare check, you don't need to know your neighbors. Does that mean that the people who designed the welfare state intended to make people poor? It doesn't really matter if they did or not, because that's where the incentives are pointing. So that would be my rationale for.
So what would the welfare state look like if you were the First Minister of Scotland?
Well, what would I do with it? Well, the thing is, I think I recommend that people buy my book, Universal Basic Income for and Against, because
Rational Rise Press. Amazon?
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon.
Amazon.
If you want your copy signed, then just send me a little note so that I can send one out to you. Not that I'm famous or anything, but some people just like it. Yeah, I don't think that you can just remove the welfare state because people are so dependent on it now. But in that book, I discuss various policies which would increase living standards, or let's say, and create an environment where voluntary institutions could creep in to perform the roles that the welfare state is meant to. And then, I would like to see that kind of phased out and replaced with community, basically. And the things could be done on a local level, but also the government can only send you a check. It doesn't know if you need some job training. It doesn't know if you need skills, if you don't have a network, if you actually, what you need is occupational therapy, what you need is to be volunteering in the nursing home or something like that, and getting out the house and feeling that you're actually a useful human being. The government can't tell that from Westminster or from Edinburgh. So the benefit that local institutions would have is they can, when you need welfare, you go and you look a person in the face and they find out about you and what your case is, and then they can put you on a program. People who've hopefully to get you back into work. If that's not possible for you, they've got limited resources, so they'll need to become experts at. They're not paying you with this money that's taken by force through the tax system, so they don't have a bottomless well. They'll have to look at the most efficient way to spend those funds, helping people, and that's the kind of those kind of like ground up institutions I think would be far better. That's kind of like a brief primer on how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, the first line of defense for all these things, I think, obviously should be the family. The families are strong and stable, then that's a lot of issues dealt with at that level, which really is the ideal. Now, in terms of the local organization model there, I can see that that's got a lot of advantages. But what would happen there, surely, is you'd end up, the government would have to oversee it, and they'd see that maybe in Dingwall, there's nothing that's really focused for drug addicts or whatever, these sort of people. And then what does the government do if there aren't these charitable agencies there? The government thinks, oh, well, we need to get one there somewhere. How can we do that? And then they start getting more and more involved in order to make sure there's even coverage. Is that inevitable?
I don't know. It might be inevitable given people's current level of economic reasoning or lack thereof, because as soon as there's as soon as there's any gap, people think, oh, we need the government to do something about this. We're quite a long way off from having people understand how spontaneous order emerges on a market, unfortunately. The thing is, I fear that if you have a government program designed to get addicts off drugs, you are just guaranteeing that you will never see an end to drug addiction, because everyone in that organization's job will depend on there being drug addicts to treat. So again, you're confronted with this incentive problem. And if you watch the documentary, I think it's called damn it, it's something Aid Inc., Foreign Aid Inc., or Food Inc. They were talking about how when we were trying to give foreign aid to third world countries, Poverty Inc., that's what it's called. You just had a bunch of organizations that grew around having this this money that was supposed to fight poverty, and they were never going to solve the problem of poverty. So wouldn't like the same thing to happen with issues like drug addiction?
Yeah, the thing about drug addiction, though, let's say we've got some centre financed by the government, and there are 5 people there who work with the drug addicts who come along to it. And I don't see that in any way as sort of incentivizing drug addiction. I don't see that creating demand for their service. Now, if actually it got to the point where there were only 10 drug addicts left in the town and they thought they were going to be out of a job if they got them all off drugs, I mean that's a pretty unlikely situation, isn't it? I think normally, just naturally, there would be a supply of people in that situation for them to deal with. So I don't see that maintains the problem in that situation. Now, maybe with other things, in terms of benefits, then I think that can have the effect of sustaining a lifestyle multi-generationally. There's not to say it's just an open choice people take to enter into that in every case, but it can have the consequence of sustaining the problem. That's for sure. So I think it's a mixture. I think there can be lots of factors at play.
Well, I guess you'd have to see it in action. I think we're not really confronting the fact that we don't have a great infrastructure or even understanding of how to deal with addiction. I think, we've got this conception that mental health experts know it all, but I mean the field's in its infancy. I think a lot of people go to the their NHS doctor looking for help with whatever it happens to be, whether it's just an addiction like losing weight, or they're struggling with depression or anxiety. If they're lucky, they'll get six sessions of CBT and then off they go. That's what they're entitled to under the system. No better than they came in. And when people turn up for help, they expect to be helped. We're in a little bit of a sad situation where I fear that, I mean, I myself am a mental health professional, I'm a therapist, that's what I do for a living. People despair to find that when they turn up for help, the help doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there is absolutely right about people going to the doctor with all sorts of issues. And that's a trend in society, isn't it? To treat more and more things as health issues, or especially as mental health issues. I think that partly relates to what you were saying earlier. It reflects a lack of connection with other sorts of local charities, institutions, organizations, or whatever, which in a lot of cases would have been the church. You'd go to the vicar or the minister to talk about a lot of these issues. But now I think it tends to be more you turn to the professionals, or it becomes medicalized. So in terms of the universal basic income, we talked about a couple of alleged benefits of it. What are the main flaws with it? Okay, sorry, just before that, I just say one thing. From the family party point of view, it's our policy is against the universal basic income, by the way. But one aspect of it that would actually be attractive is that we're quite keen on giving parents choice how to structure their work childcare system. So if they want to have one parent working, one parent at home with the young kids full time, we want the tax system, etc., to try and facilitate that, to help them to make that choice if they want to. A universal basic income would be a very significant step in that direction. So if, for example, mum chose to be at home with the kids for 4 or 5 years, then that would be a major step in that direction. But for other reasons, we don't think that's the way to try and achieve that end. There's other ways that are better. Anyway, so some of the problems with universal basic income.
You want some of the problems with it?
Yeah.
Or okay. Well, I mean, one thing is, in some cases, you'll be making people's lives worse. I mean, you can't differentiate between, for example, a drug addict or someone who's addicted to computer games, giving them money when actually they'd be better going out and about if they've got substance addictions. You're not just making their lives worse, you'll be making their deaths worse. There's obviously that. One thing's the disincentive to work. Secondly, you're going to have to tax people who are working significantly more to cover the basic income, since it means spending a lot more. That's going to disincentivize work. Also, if it's paid for by printing money, you're essentially increasing the money supply. The price of goods and services is going to go up. People's rents will go up. What's going to happen? People just go out. They think that this money is going to come from the rich people. They're just going to go out to the shops and spend it. It's going to go back to the rich people, except for there'll be less production and standards of living. The thing is, people don't understand that it's actually like production, not consumption, that makes people rich, right? So when you're taking the money from companies, the corporation tax or whatever, from the rich people who've got it invested in the stock market and machines and factories, it might look like you're getting a nice tasty handout here, but what you're doing with the handout, you're going out and buying some stuff and consuming it, and then there's less stuff to go around. When the money's in the machines, the factories, it's doing research and technology and so forth, that's when you have the escalation of production, the innovation that reduces the cost of goods and services. As we've seen, this laptop that I'm on, it cost a few £100. I wouldn't be able to get a machine this powerful a few years ago without spending £1,000 or two. So it's all of that, the money that's in production, that actually increases people's living standards in real terms over time. So, but they're kind of under this illusion that, if you go out, give people money and they go out to the shops and spend it, that's what gets the economy going. That's very superficially compelling economic reasoning, but it's not how the economy works.
Yeah. The problem with that is the basic argument in favor of the universal income. I mean, really anyone can understand that, can't they? Whereas the arguments against it are a bit more involved, and that makes things an uphill struggle in the modern political arena. When I heard that there's roughly, 10 or 20% of people who engage with politics online or in some way, muted by the way, in some way beyond just, catching a bit of the TV news or looking at the BBC website a little bit or whatever. But the 80% of people, that's as far as it goes. So like the arguments you've just presented, they're never going to come across those. Never.
That's exactly right. And this is the problem with economics in general. Frederick Bastiat, a fantastic French economist from the first half of the 19th century, said, we must admit that our enemies have an advantage over us in that in a single sentence, they can utter a half-truth. But to demonstrate that it's a half-truth, we must have recourse to long and dry dissertations. Yeah. And this is the problem. I don't know the expression, the a lie gets around the world by the time the truth puts its pants on, or whatever. It's very, very difficult. It's hard to be optimistic. What I would say is economic reasoning's extremely interesting. So the one advantage it maybe has on its side is if you can show people like how you can think through the logic of what the knock-on effects of a policy is, the right way, they might go, oh, that's interesting. They might be interested in hearing more. But I agree with you. It's pretty hard to get the point across because people only want to look at the conspicuous results of a policy. So, oh, if you
Yeah.
increase the minimum wage, then people on low incomes will have a higher wage. But you don't consider that, well, those employers will have to employ less of those people, so a lot of people will have no wage. What's more, a lot of people who don't have any work experience, they need to be in a job getting on the job training so that they can get skillful. I'm not going to pay someone £10 an hour to train them while they're making me
Uh-huh.
no money whatsoever. So
Mhm.
by, slapping a minimum wage on, you're actually reducing my ability to improve someone's prospects by taking them on for
Yeah.
on-the-job
Yeah.
training. Stuff like that should be obvious. The reason why they put minimum prices on alcohol is because they know if you increase the price of alcohol, less people will buy it. But for some reason, you can't get it through these people's thick heads that if you increase the price of labor, less people will employ labor. It's really, really rather infuriating. It should be obvious.
With a lot of these things, I've talked about it recently, it's been the modern studies mindset. I don't know if you know, in Scotland, there's a subject, academic subject called modern studies. It's basically
Right.
indoctrination. A big module about inequality. So that's, inequality is a bad thing. And the government does various things about it. And they learn about various anti-inequality measures, basically ways the government's got of giving money to various people in various situations. And they assess them to see which one they think's, which ones are best at tackling inequality. But then that's it. That's the end of the essay. I mean, the other side, where does this money come from?
Right.
And the wider effects, that's just not there at all. So I always find it amusing when you hear MSPs, like Hamza Yousaf's one. There's other ones as well. Will say, I got interested in politics by studying modern studies. I think, yeah, I can see that.
Right.
So the whole Scottish Parliament's studied modern studies and hasn't really gone much beyond it in understanding the broader perspective on these issues. It's just the very simplistic understanding that basically giving money to people helps them.
Yes,
And that's it.
inequality is pretty much all they've got left because we long since debunked the idea that communism would be or socialism would be more productive than capitalism because we'd get out the greedy capitalists who are skimming off 12% in profits. The old left were in favor of economic growth, and they said that socialism would be more productive than capitalism. But then they found out that that was wrong. So we had all the people saying economic growth is a bad thing. It's bad for the environment. Inequality is bad, etc. So, I mean, we've basically won. Or when I say we, I mean those who are in favor of the market economy. We've basically won on every issue. So inequality is all they've got left. I was actually in some skeptic society meeting or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but we were discussing poverty and things like that, and I mentioned India and other examples of countries that had become much more wealthy, much less poverty because of market reforms. And someone actually said outright, well, there might be a lot less poverty in India, but inequality has skyrocketed. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I was actually dumbfounded. It was like he was like a caricature of a leftist saying that. And I was thinking, you really hate people, don't you? You would rather all those people were poor and equal than they weren't in poverty and they were you'd rather they were equally poor than that they were coming out of poverty. It's very,
Mm-hmm.
very sad, you know? And it's not like, I mean, I'm sure a lot of very rich people got rich for reasons that I don't agree with, by rent seeking, by lobbying the government, by getting the government to ban their competition and so forth. But
Mm-hmm.
our opponents are not really that great at having that nuanced view. They're saying that wealth per se, that private property per se is a bad thing. They're not saying, well, I don't mind people being rich as long as, they did it legitimately through the voluntary exchange of goods and services, and that their goods and services um, increased the living standards of millions of people, as
Mm-hmm.
Amazon has. I mean, Jeff Bezos is a rent seeker, and I wish he'd stop it. But you can't deny that, people benefit from Amazon services. So this is the problem. Sometimes our nuance, the fact that we want to see things clearly as they are, seem to stand against us.
Here's an interesting one. There's a slightly off topic, but it just made me think about that. Like if you were a Labour MSP in Scotland, if you drove around in a new Range Rover, that really wouldn't go down well, would it? You'd be a bit worried about doing that. You'd think that the Labour supporters are going to think, there's something wrong here. That's a sign of inequality. Whereas the SNP talks the inequality line as much as anyone. And yet you get the likes of Ian Blackford. Well, new Range Rover for himself, one for his wife, whatever. And somehow or other, that doesn't seem to register. There doesn't seem to be any kickback from the supporters. I don't know if that's because in the SNP, independence is just so all-consuming that they're willing to forgive these other things with it. But it's quite a contrast. Because if you hear the SNP talking, they talk like Labour in terms of solving inequality, whatever. Why does that difference exist, do you think?
I think people just want to hear the right things. They're not, people are committed to their side. I've been seeing this recently. I remember when I was in university, an associate of mine was going on about how this organization and that organization are just a front for the Labour Party and they're biased and things like that. So I'm still seeing him on Facebook now, and everything that the SNP does is obviously correct. People's critical faculty seems to check out when they are affiliated with a side.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really explain it. I mean, current affairs aren't really my strong point. I'm more kind of like political philosophy and economics, history. Those are kind of more my wheelhouse.
Yeah. Time has flown at an incredible rate.
It certainly has.
A couple of comments I just wanted to bring in. Got this one here. Doubling the allowance before tax for fathers to earn more money that would afford mothers more time to spend with the children, less stress on families. Our policy of transferable tax allowance for married couples, that's what it effectively does. It doesn't have to be the father, it could be the mother. So if you've got one parent working, one not working, then they would keep a lot more of the money and they'd be more able to make that decision. I would say that's one of our most important and basic policies. Would that be something on the Scottish libertarian wavelength, or?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think any reduction in taxes is generally a good thing. I mean, you could do all sorts of things that were in a libertarian direction that people wouldn't like. For example, if someone takes their child out of public school and puts them in a private school, they're saving the state money. So you could give them a partial tax rebate, and that would help more working class people have access to private education. Oh no, but you can't do that. Things like that. I sympathize with you that I would like to see families stick together. I think probably single parenthood is the biggest source of strain on the welfare state, and obviously the sociological problems deriving from single motherhood are huge, and that the welfare state, you're not allowed to say it, but that it has basically created an epidemic of single motherhood. So I could see why you would want to enact policies that would turn the tide back on that. I don't know what your chances are of having those policies implemented these days where you're not even allowed to say.
Well, that's the thing, though. For small parties like ourselves, I mean, obviously, you might be a candidate in the next election. We'll have candidates, but Scotland is not going to be run by a coalition of the Scottish Family Party and the Scottish Libertarians after the next election. So, I mean, basically, these are minority views. So, in a democracy, we can't expect that they're going to be government policy. But our thinking is more, if we get MSPs in the Parliament, at least it opens up the debate. At least more people can hear these arguments, and that's how things can really get moving. In a democracy, you've got to persuade people, basically. And the problem at the moment is people are not hearing a huge section of the spectrum of opinion, partly because it's never expressed in the Parliament. Then the media follow the Parliament and stick on the same sort of safe territory. So we think opening up the debate and persuading more and more people of the views is good. Because the thing we've got on our side, as I'm sure you think you have as well, There's a lot of things you're saying, they're fresh for people. With the other parties, they just talk about the same old things. They're trying to nitpick each other's policies, but they're basically on the same wavelength.
That's right.
Whereas if you've got something different, I mean, that makes people sit up. And I think people are much more open to be persuaded when they hear something for the first time and think, yeah, I can see some sense in that. So that's the long-term view.
Yes, I mean, it's unfortunate. You think, with all the talk of privilege on the left, you've got your white privilege, your male privilege, and what forth. They'd care to mention probably the biggest privilege of all, the most important privilege of all, which is good parenting privilege. And I fear that the reason why they can't talk about good parenting privilege is all the evidence shows that having a dad around as well as a mum is going to give a person the best advantage in life, and to not have one parent is going to put them at a tremendous disadvantage.
You're in the wrong party. You're in the wrong party. I'll send you a link to sign up after this.
Well, I do look forward to the day when we do rule Scotland as a coalition of the Scottish Family Party and the Scottish Libertarian Party. I consider you an ally, Richard, and I'm glad that your voice is out there and you're spreading the word to those people who it appeals to you.
I think with libertarian as well, I think it's a really interesting perspective on politics. And I think having that voice in the debate, I think is a really positive thing. But we're going to do the usual thing where I say, our guests are obviously not perfect, so they don't agree with us on anything, on everything. And Anthony had picked a couple of policies that he disagreed with the family party on. We're not going to have time to talk about those, but this is something, a genuine question, because I'm not quite sure. What's the Scottish Libertarians' policy on Scottish independence?
We are in favour of it. The party is officially in favour of it. We have members that are against Scottish independence, but it was voted on again last year at the AGM. Some people wanted to drop it, and the majority carried that our policy would remain to be in favour of independence. So even though we've got senior members of the party who don't share that view, mostly because they don't want to live in the People's Republic of Scotland.
That's interesting. I wonder how many people their position on independence is determined by what sort of Scotland they think they would end up in. In other words, are there people who think, I really like the idea of an independent Scotland, but not the sort that I think we'd get? In fact, I've heard people say that, actually.
Yes. And even our leader said he doesn't want us taken out of the British Union just to be foisted back into the European Union. So if that's what the SNP has in mind, even though he's strongly in favour of independence, he'd have to consider his vote carefully.
Now, here's an interesting thing on the EU. Now, you're obviously not a fan of the EU. Personally, I'm not. Scottish Family Party, we don't get into that particularly. We might in the future. If Scotland became independent, then we would take a policy on EU membership. But I was hearing some people from Eastern European countries, and in those countries, it's the right wing of politics that want the country to be in the EU. Because the EU reins in their crazy overspending governments.
Right.
And it's the left that want to get out so that they can just have a spending bonanza. So Scotland's really keen to get into the EU, but would they really? Is that the way it would really stay? I don't know. I was fascinated to hear that. I think it was Slovenia I was hearing it from, that the right wing are just desperate to get into the EU to get their government under control.
I've heard that as well. They don't want the EU. They just hate Westminster. They just hate. It's like it reminds me of, I don't know if you've heard of him, Norman Finkelstein, the critic of Israel, when asked about when asked about the Palestinian I can't remember what the name of the organization is for my sins. He said they don't want peace, they just don't want Israel. And that was coming from a critic of Israel. He thought they were. It's kind of like that. It's like they just don't want Westminster. They love EU. Apparently, it's liberal and cosmopolitan, and I can't explain it. It's just a tribal thing, like your football team at this point.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we'll draw things to a close. Time's flown as usual. That was a really interesting discussion. I'm sure people have really appreciated hearing your perspectives. Thanks to everyone who's been watching and chipping in. I'm not very good at picking up on comments, am I? It's just a bit too much to fit in my brain tracking comments, but we put a couple in. But thanks for all the others as well. But we have seen them as they've been coming up. So
Thank you. Thank you so
yeah,
much for having me.
A pleasure. Till next time.
Till next time.
In the new year as well. We'll talk about the things we didn't get to this time.
Great.
Drugs and assisted suicide, for example.
Bye-bye.
Right. Thanks, everyone, and good night.